Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Najib with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines. Former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib has been found guilty in all 7 charges of corruption in the first of 5 cases linked to the 1MDB state fund. Najib faced these charges in relation to SRC International and allegations that millions of dollars ended up in his personal bank account. He has also become the first Malaysian Prime Minister to be convicted in a criminal court. Iraq says 3 Katyusha rockets hit Camp Taji military base, which houses US-led coalition forces in northern Baghdad. In a statement, the Iraqi military said a helicopter was damaged in the strikes. The military mentioned there were no casualties. The worldwide number of COVID-19 deaths has crossed 654,000 with over 16.4 million cases. In the US, 1,057 more people have died, while over 54,000 have tested positive in the last 24 hours. The country's death toll has exceeded 148,000, while infections tally nears 4.3 million. In Pakistan, 23 more people have lost their lives, with the death toll rising to 5,865 with 936 new cases. The tally of nationwide infections has crossed 275,000. China says Hong Kong's government will suspend crime-related assistance agreements with the UK, Canada and Australia. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin says the move by the 3 countries to end the extradition treaties is a gross interference in China's internal affairs. And the West Indies will be looking to survive the last day of their 3rd Test match against England when play resumes today at Manchester's Old Trafford. Windies were struggling at 10-2 as day 4 of the match was completely washed out by rain. The series is currently level at 1 each. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back now for the news in detail. Former Malaysian Prime Minister Najib has been found guilty in all 7 charges of corruption in the first of 5 cases linked to the 1MDB state fund. Najib faced these charges in relation to SRC International and allegations that millions of dollars ended up in his personal bank account. Criminal charges came only after Najib's defeat in the 2018 elections, when his successor Mahathir Mohamad reopened investigations. He has also become the first Malaysian Prime Minister to be convicted in a criminal court. This comes just days after Goldman Sachs reached a $3.9 billion deal with Malaysia to drop criminal charges over its role in the scandal. Based on publicly filed accounts, 1MDB has nearly $11.73 billion in debt. Now, Iraq says 3 Katyusha rockets hit Camp Taji military base, which houses US-led coalition forces in northern Baghdad. In a statement, the Iraqi military said a helicopter was damaged in the strikes. It said the rockets were launched from Sabah al-Bor neighborhood and fell on the area of the base used by Iraqi forces. The coalition said none of its personnel were injured in the raid. The rocket strike is the latest in a long-running series of low-intensity attacks on military bases in Iraq. No group has yet claimed responsibility for these strikes. Well, now in India and occupied Kashmir, up to 25,000 people have been granted bogus domicile certificates, raising fears of the beginning of a demographic change. New Delhi's law makes it possible for people from outside the territory to become permanent residents. Kashmiri leaders say the rule is aimed at changing the Muslim majority status of occupied Kashmir through illegal Hindu settlers. India abrogated Article 370 of its constitution last year, revoking the special status of the disputed valley. This opened the doors for non-Kashmiris to buy property. Pakistan has opposed the domicile law, calling it a violation of international law and United Nations resolutions. Well, now in Pakistan, nearly 88% of COVID-19 patients have recovered so far as the country sees a sharp decline in new cases. The Health Ministry said 23 people have died while 936 infections were detected in the last 24 hours. The ministry said the countrywide death toll has risen to nearly 6,000 with over 275,000 confirmed cases. It said there are nearly 27,000 active cases in Pakistan, among which 1,217 are in a critical condition. The southern province of Sindh is worst hit with nearly 119,000 cases, while Punjab has reported more than 92,000 infections. Now, the worldwide number of COVID-19 deaths has crossed 654,000 with over 16.4 million cases. In the US, 1,075 more people have died, while over 54,000 people tested positive in the last 24 hours. The country's death toll has exceeded 148,000, while infections tally nears 4.3 million. More details in this report.
With hundreds of thousands getting infected every day across the globe, the World Health Organization has warned the pandemic is accelerating. California is the latest of the U.S. states that have now run out of healthcare facilities and professionals as cases hit the roof. After Brazil and Mexico suffering the worst in Latin America, cases and deaths in Venezuela are now rising to unprecedented levels. But the country, already reeling from an economic crisis, has limited options when it comes to reimposing restrictions.
Venezuela is in default with the bank for just over $700 million. The rules of the bank mean that when there is a default of that size, there is absolutely nothing we can do.
The second wave of the new coronavirus is now gripping Europe as countries reimpose several restrictions. Calling London's 14-day quarantine decision unjust, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez appealed to the regional countries not to cut travel ties.
Before we reproach each other, let's try to find a balance where, above all, the British authorities base their decision on the cumulative incidents, that is to say, on the evolution of the epidemic in these territories which are tourist destinations, which I insist are safe for British tourists.
China recorded 68 new cases, the highest daily figure since April, due to clusters in 3 separate regions. In Indonesia, the total number of cases has topped 100,000. Over in Australia, while the pace of the outbreak in Victoria refuses to slow down, new clusters emerging in Belmur have added to the government's worries.
Now, US Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad is visiting Pakistan this week to seek Islamabad's support for the intra-Afghan negotiations. It has been 5 months since the US and the Taliban signed a peace deal in Doha, agreeing to participate in the talks. But the dialogue has been delayed due to Kabul's reluctance to some Taliban prisoners as stipulated by the pact. Our correspondent Isa Naqvi from Islamabad has more.
Since the signing of the historic Doha deal, there has been little progress in bringing the warring sides to the negotiating table. In a bid to bring the decades-long war to an end, the US has fulfilled its promise of reducing number of its troops in Afghanistan. It has also withdrawn its forces from 5 military bases. But the release of Taliban inmates by the Afghan government seems to be the real bottleneck in the peace process.
I think primarily the Afghan government has been driven by a sense of insecurity, deep sense of insecurity, which made it relent on the promise of release of 5,000 prisoners. And to date, it remains the sticking point. The majority of prisoners have been released, but I think President Ashraf Ghani and his associates want to preserve their central role in any future setup.
Experts believe some regional powers want to sabotage the peace process in Afghanistan.
After the Americans and the Taliban, they arrived at an agreement, then we could see very clearly that India was losing ground in Afghanistan. Now, this is the fear of losing that control. This is the fear of losing all those years which they had put in Afghanistan. It is because once the Americans leave, it would be extremely difficult for India to carve out a role for themselves in that part of the world.
Islamabad believes the Doha peace deal is a historic opportunity to bring peace to the war-torn country.
Pakistan has always believed that lasting peace will only come when intra-Afghan dialogue takes place. And the agreement, Doha agreement, is a critical step in that path.
Experts say it is a decisive moment in the history of this region and would carve the future of South Asia. Reporting for Indus News, Isa Naqvi, Islamabad.
Moving on now, North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un says Pyongyang's nuclear weapons will deter any potential war in the Korean peninsula. In a speech carried by the state media, Kim said country's nukes are developed to stave off another armed conflict. Marking the 67th anniversary of the end of the Korean War, Kim said Pyongyang is capable of defending itself from imperialist forces. This comes amid stalled talks with the U.S. over dismantling Pyongyang's weapons program in exchange for sanctions relief. The bilateral tensions have been intensifying since the failed Vietnam summit between Kim and the U.S. President Donald Trump in February 2019. Now, China says it firmly opposes comments from Australia that Beijing's territorial claim over the South China Sea is unlawful. During a daily briefing, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said Beijing has a legitimate historic right to energy-rich waters. Wenbin said China's claims will not be altered by groundless accusations by certain countries. China claims 90% of the waters, but Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan and Vietnam also lay claims to part of it.
China's territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests in the South China Sea were developed throughout the long course of history. They are upheld by successive Chinese governments in conformity with international law.
Well, last week, the Australian government filed a declaration to the United Nations rejecting China's maritime claims. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said China's claims are inconsistent with the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Well, now, China says Hong Kong's government will suspend crime-related assistance agreements with the UK, Canada and Australia. This comes after the three countries suspended extradition treaties with the Hong Kong over China's new security law. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin says the move by the countries is gross interference in China's internal matters. Canada, Britain and Australia are part of the Five Eyes intelligence alliance. The other member, New Zealand, has also suspended its extradition treaty with the territory. Wellington says it cannot trust that Hong Kong's criminal justice system is independent of China, while the United States has also hinted at doing the same. Moving on, the UK has resumed issuing visas for Iranians after a 10-year pause. The British Embassy said Iranian citizens will be able to apply for a visa from the centre in Tehran. It said the applicants will have to follow certain safety steps to proceed with the applications. Earlier, the British ambassador to Iran, Rob Mackay, said the consulate had made plans to reopen its centre in the country. Now, Yemen's Prime Minister says the international community should take strong action against Houthi blackmailing over a decaying oil tanker. Prime Minister Ma'in Abdul Malik Saeed said the rebels have reneged on promises to allow UN experts to board the tanker. Saeed urged the UN Security Council to put maximum pressure on the rebels in order to avoid an environmental disaster. He said his government will comply with all solutions that will lead to emptying the tanker. The safer tanker is carrying more than 1 million barrels of crude oil and is stranded off Yemen's city of Hudaydah. Earlier, the UN warned that the tanker poses a serious threat to marine life and livelihoods of thousands of people. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin have discussed the recent developments in the war-torn Libya and Syria. Turkish Communications Ministry said Erdogan and Putin talked on various issues in a phone call. The ministry said both leaders agreed to maintain cooperation and dialogue over bilateral relations and regional issues. It said Erdogan and Putin also discussed the recent escalation between Azerbaijan and Armenia. The two presidents stressed that there are no alternatives to diplomatic settlement of the conflict. The Kremlin said Putin stressed the importance of prevention of any actions promoting further escalation in the region. Now, Russia says there is no need to revive an obsolete platform such as G8. This comes a day after Germany turned down US President Donald Trump's proposal of adding Russia back to the group. In a statement, Deputy Chairman of Russian Security Council Dmitry Medvedev said nothing can be discussed without having India and China at the table. Medvedev said the existence of G7 is questionable when there is G20 and other international frameworks. He said Crimea and Ukraine are being used as an excuse not to restore the G8. In Australia, New South Wales police have warned students of Chinese background studying in Sydney to be aware of a virtual kidnapping scam. They say the scam has obtained millions in payments from unsuspecting victims. The police department said victims are called by the criminals claiming to be from Chinese authority like the police or tax department. Well, now moving on with the next stories we have for you in the bulletin is from the United Nations, which says COVID-19 restrictions are pushing starving communities over the edge, risking the lives of 10,000 children every month. H1 farms are cut off from markets and villages are isolated from food and medical aid. Talking to media, 4 UN agencies warn that growing malnutrition will have long-term consequences. They called on world leaders to earmark at least $2.4 billion in aid to fight the global hunger crisis. The UNICEF has declared Afghanistan a red zone, saying child malnutrition spiked from 690,000 in January to 780,000, a 13% increase. A recent survey by Johns Hopkins University showed lives of some 13,000 children on the line in Afghanistan. More than 100 people have been killed and tens of thousands displaced by floods in northeast India. The disaster has hit when New Delhi is struggling to deal with the surge of the new coronavirus in the country. The eastern state of Bihar is the worst hit, where 2.4 million people have been hit by floods across 11 districts. But state authorities fear matters might get worse because of the Meteorological Center has warned of more rain till August 1st. Flooding is common during the monsoon season in the region, but this year the state has received extraordinary torrential rains. Now, most European stocks have edged up as signs of progress on fresh American government stimulus efforts outweigh concerns about a global coronavirus resurgence. The pan-European stock 600 has added 0.5% so far, with construction and material stocks climbing. London's FTSE and Germany's DAX have gained nearly 0.5%. Paris's CAC 40 has slipped fractionally after a positive start. Earlier, stocks in Asia-Pacific were trading mixed as investors monitored developments on the coronavirus front. South Korea's Kospi and mainland Chinese shares gained, while Japanese and Australian bourses dipped into negative territory. The West Indies have scored 17 runs for 2 wickets and will be looking to survive the last day of the third Test match against England at Batchinshire's Old Trafford. The visitors are struggling to chase a mammoth target of 399 runs. The fourth day was completely washed out by persistent rain after England declared their second innings after scoring 226 runs for the loss of 2 wickets. Intermittent passing showers are expected, but the forecast suggests a mostly dry day. Earlier, Windies only managed 197 runs in the first innings in response to the hosts putting 369 runs on the board. The series is currently level at 1-1. Pakistan Cricket Board has announced its 20-man squad for the upcoming 3-match test series against England. The PCB said former captain Sarfaraz Ahmed and fast bowler Wahab Riaz have made the cut for the series starting next week. Wicketkeeper Sarfaraz was sacked as captain from all formats last year, and his last test was against South Africa in January 2019. Wahab took an indefinite break from the format last year, and his last test appearance was in October 2018. The PCB named a 29-man combined squad for the matches, and the remaining 9 players will continue to train with the squad for the T20s. Pakistan will also play 3 T20s after the test series, with the opening match in Manchester set to begin from August 5th. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News. Take care.